Hey everybody out there, my name is Dragnix, and this is Kero Blaster. $9.99 came out on the Steam store yesterday. It took a while for it to come out. They pushed forward the release time and then kept on pushing it back over and over again. I was waiting for it to release, and so you guys get the video today. Now, this is developed by Studio Pixel, and it's a 2D side-scrolling action game. Now you're probably saying, Studio Pixel, that sounds familiar. Well, it should. Daisuke Amaya, the one-man team, is the man behind Cave Story, the guy who did the 5 years of development on the one game that's pretty influential in the indie community. And now they bring you Kero Blaster for the Steam, the game that originally came out for the iOS in 2014. The question is, does the port do the game justice, and does it deserve your time? Let's find out. Let's start with a little bit with the story. You are a bipedal frog with a master's in custodial sciences. Basically, you're a janitor, but you are part of CNF Incorporated, which is Cat and Frog Incorporated. Usually don't see the janitor's name in the actual company title, but hey, guess what? You're that important. Now, the basic plot centers around the fact there are these strange black creatures that have sort of gotten into your company's teleporters and basically into your company's main building. You don't know exactly what's going on, what are these black things, what's going on with your sort of boss lady, the cat, and why am I a frog necessarily? But hey, answers will come later at this point. But you're trying to figure out what's going on, and what sort of disappoints to begin with is the fact that you sort of have the expectation of Cave Story right off the get-go, because of the fact that Cave Story was such a touching story. It was such a interesting weaving a narrative and gameplay for a small title by one person. I feel like unfortunately, Kero Blaster never lives up to that, and it doesn't necessarily have to, but you're almost expecting it out of this point, because it does have those flashes of the sort of witty dialogue, like with the sort of scientists that, are talking to you and trying to figure out exactly what's going on. So it does have the flashes of it, and there are other games that sort of complement this in Pink Hour and Pink Heaven, which actually give a little bit more of the story, but in terms of the main storyline, unfortunately, it's less charming, and unfortunately, it's less important in the overall picture. So if you're expecting the same experience as Cave Story, you're not going to get it here. Now, talking a little bit about the aesthetic, you should be reminded of Cave Story at the get-go here, because it is done by the same artist, of course, Daisuke Amaya. Now, you can still see that unique Cave Story aspects to it, like you see here with the enemy's eyes bulging out as he gets hit and dies. That's sort of unique to the Cave Story in terms of that box enemy that you were facing at the start of it, and it definitely has that same feel to it. Not to say that it has evolved any, though. Again, it feels very Cave Story-like, but unfortunately it hasn't evolved much in terms of the art style. There's definitely different mechanics and maybe some different, coloring and things like that, but it feels like you're playing, again, an extension of the game, which, yeah, I can see where people would like that, but I feel like with all the pixel platformers out there, I feel like this one sort of doesn't necessarily stand out against them. So it does give a nostalgic feeling, which is good, but in the end, it's, sort of in the middle of the road, which, alright, if you're focusing on gameplay, that's fine. Now, as to the game's sound design and music, let's take a listen a little bit to exactly what the game has to show. I'm actually sort of surprised. I did not expect the level of music that was on here coming from an iOS port, only because iOS games don't necessarily have the strength in terms of music. It doesn't necessarily need it. You got people playing, in the middle of, of buses, trains, things like that, or on the go. It doesn't necessarily have the same musical effect or necessary sound requirements that you would on a game like at the PC, but the music definitely does the job. It definitely does sort of complement the action in question. I actually appreciated it, and I didn't want to turn it off, so that's a good sign for the music and sound design as well. Your lasers hitting things, the tire here sort of, running into the portion in question. It's reasonable at this point, and I do appreciate it. But in the end, you're going to be here for the gameplay, and this is a 2D side-scrolling shooter with simple controls. You have to remember that this game came from the iOS, and I'm actually surprised it did. You can see on a screenshot here that it has this sort of left-right-up mechanic that I'm not exactly sure how it works. I haven't played it myself, but it just seems a little strange. This seems to be a little bit more straightforward in terms of its controls. You can move left and right to the screen, shoot, you have a simple jump, you do get a double jump later, and, well, basically avoid everything that you can. don't get hit and, survive as long as you can. As you see there, you have a number of lives, and of course, if you die, you're taken back to the hospital and you have to start the whole stage over again. Each stage is, reasonably length, but not necessarily too hard in terms of the live system. Of course, you can buy more lives and hearts via this store system in question, so that makes things a little bit easier. Now, the complication in terms of combat comes with your different weaponry. You get 3 more weapons on top of your original blaster. You get a sort of wide shot, which turns into a spread shot as you upgrade it. You get a bubble shot, which is sort of going to bounce at the enemy. It's going to be more affected by gravity. And then you get a flamethrower, which of course everybody loves flamethrowers. Don't tell me otherwise. Now, each of them have their own strengths and weaknesses, and some of them are more obvious than others. Try to use a flamethrower underwater, yeah, that's not going to go well. But even the bubble will have it be affected by gravity and just sort of rise to the top. What's interesting about the weaponry is that they all have their own situational purposes, but you still can use the weaponry as you see fit. I still like the spread shot most of the time because of its ability to do a lot of damage up close, but the fact of the matter was I could still snipe from afar. But in certain situations, it made a lot of sense for me to switch to the bubble weapon as you see here, because I'm able to keep myself out of danger while still being able to hit the enemy over and over again. Each weapon does serve its own purpose, and you're going to have to switch through them to really get the most out of the game, and I really do appreciate the simplistic nature of it, but still being able to be fun and be able to deal with all these situations that the game throws at you without compromising sort of the fun aspect of it. Now, some people may see this simple gameplay and wonder, well, okay, how does this game sort of going to be able to keep my attention over time? Well, that's the good thing about games like this. You see, the games like Contra, for example, are able to have simple mechanics, but it's able to sort of complement it with different variety in other areas. And the other area in Kero Blaster's case is its level design. Level design is probably one of the strongest elements of Kero Blaster because it's able to keep the variety up and keep you sort of familiar with the situation that you're in, but sort of twist it on you so that you have to figure out exactly how you're going to attack this next room. It doesn't necessarily throw hundreds and hundreds of enemies at you, but it throws you enemies in a different way where you have to think, okay, hold on a second, I've been dealing with these situations in a different way before, now I'm being thrown into this. How do I deal with this with the weapon set that I have? And I really do appreciate the level design here. There are a variety of levels, and you're going to have different elements that you're going to have to deal with. Sometimes going a slow and steady pace in terms of, the jumping and really thinking about what you're doing is going to be necessary. But sometimes you're going to have these action sections where you're going to have to keep up the pace. Sometimes it's better for you to just run along and try to get through these enemies without necessarily doing the damage that you need to do. You don't have to kill those enemies, you just need to sort of get around them at this point. You can kill them, and there are different varieties and different playstyles that you can play as, but luckily, Kero Blaster is able to do those things without compromising the core game, and I really have to give it to Studio Pixel here because of the fact that it does the job without overcomplicating it either. See, Kero Blaster is a fine example of simple design turning into great gameplay. Even though you are very, very simple in terms of your control scheme. You only have a jump and shoot. It's jump and shoot. You're almost like Mega Man in some ways. And you have an arsenal very similar to Mega Man, where each weapon does have its own sort of special, cases in terms of being able to deal with the situation. But it's sort of using that and using the level design to complement it to make a game that changes on you while still seeming familiar. A lot of games try to do a lot of things in terms of mechanics and almost introduce too many mechanics at once, where the gameplay is sort of overloaded. You don't know what to do, the player's confused, and everything is going on screen that you just don't understand what's actually happening. But Kero Blaster keeps it simple in the best way. It keeps it simple to get to the other side of the screen, shoot, and keeping the controls solid while not necessarily compromising fun in the overall picture. Now, it's helped with some variety in terms of enemies. They're not necessarily, anything that's going to change the industry in terms of the enemy types here. You're going to have enemies that run at you. You're going to have enemies that, sort of change up its style in terms of throwing bullets at you or, dealing with different mechanics underwater, for example. But it does the job over time, and you don't necessarily feel stagnation over time facing some of the similar enemies that you see over and over again. It does a good job of sparsely throwing them in there and keeping new enemies coming towards you at that point. Now, boss fights can be sort of hit or miss, though. I do think boss fights in general should be a little bit more of testing your skills and being a little bit more of a, sort of stopping point. Like, okay, here's what we're going to throw at you now. Here's a little bit something different. Here's going to be a test of what you've learned at this point. In terms of Kero Blaster, that can happen at times, but sometimes it just feels like the same enemies you've been facing and just maybe a little bit beefier at that point. And that doesn't necessarily work for me. In this fight, as you see here, I don't see what the game was going for in terms of its mechanics. I've faced this bomb enemy before, and there's nothing really unique here. Yeah, there's 2 levels, but honestly, it's basically 2 different playing fields, and I just have to jump up to one to deal with the other. Honestly, not necessarily the greatest strength of the game, and I felt like the boss fights in general didn't do the job. In general, there were some good boss fights, especially towards the latter part of the game, but overall, I would say the boss fights disappointed me. Now, for some small gameplay notes, one of the things that you're going to have to really deal with is the jumping mechanics. There are a lot of jumps in this game that take advantage of, the horizontal or vertical height that you can get at their most maximum. So there are going to be sections where you're going to only have to do a vertical jump and have no horizontal movement in it. And likewise, there's going to be horizontal jumps that are going to not want any verticality in them whatsoever. They're sort of extreme in some cases, and some of them do have, pits of death at that point, so you have to always watch out for them. But I felt like it did change up gameplay a little bit. I felt like, in Mario, yeah, you have those sort of difficult jumps, especially in games like Kaizo Mario, but you always could feel like, the regular jump could do its job. Here, you actually had to stop and actually do the jump in question, so it sort of did change up the pace of gameplay, and I did appreciate it that. But note that, because sometimes it may be a little bit frustrating, because you're wondering, how do I get up here? You're trying to do sort of a horizontal vertical jump, when in fact you actually just need to do a vertical jump. Now, I do want to sort of address the point that this game was on iOS, and it is cheaper on iOS for $5.99. However, there is reasons to get it on Steam. I have sort of, come back to the past of the fact that, iOS ports need to additionally add something for the PC experience, and I do think it does add with the control scheme in question, but more than that, you also get the Zango mode, which is a whole new mode, a whole new story that brings, a little bit more variety to Steam, which is really appreciated. And I think the fact that you actually have a controller in your hand does give you the reasons to do this at this point. It does feel more natural at this point to play a game like this with a controller. Now, that only goes so far, though. I am a little disappointed in the options. The screen resolution, as you see here, it's sort of misguided at this point. Yeah, it's 1080p with a gray box around it. It's a full screen and, sort of a 1x, 2x, 3x window mode kind of situation, so I don't feel like it took advantage of the actual platform in question. There's also audio options missing. I can't change the sound in-game, which I would expect for a simple set of options from a iOS port. Obviously, you would be a sort of a mute situation. You can turn the volume on the side of the phone that you're playing on or the tablet, but here you need to put that into a game like this. People do sort of expect it, especially people who are trying to make videos of your stuff. Sometimes that simple change can really help things, because now you're not fighting, Windows and other, platforms for the sound settings that you've gotten perfected outside of the game, but now you got to adjust it outside the game, in the game. It's a little bit annoying. So I do wish there were more settings for the game in question. It does have bindable keys, which I do appreciate, however. The one thing, though, that Kero Blaster unfortunately doesn't do is have that knockout punch. What do I mean by that? Well, the knockout punch, in my terms, is something that drives you to the game in question. Something that you can uniquely sort of hold up and say, hey, look, this is something that you want to play because of this mechanic. Something like, for example, Holy Potatoes, a weapon shop. Even though it is sort of a basic simulator game, its humor and its self-referential humor in terms of media and something like that definitely makes it shine and stand out from some of its other companions in the genre. Here with Kero Blaster, it feels like it was influenced by Cave Story, and it definitely has some of the elements of Cave Story, but never has that sort of draw in one way where it makes you stand out and makes you go, yeah, you need to play this now. Kero Blaster is a solid game in many aspects. There's great level design, there's good gameplay, good controls, but in the end, it just doesn't have that element that makes you want to go and purchase it right now. For me, it's a sale title. It's a game that I want to play and I want to finish when I have the chance, but unfortunately compared to the other games out there, it just doesn't necessarily shine compared to anything else and doesn't have that unique aspect to shine over anybody else at that point. It also unfortunately has a little bit of a stigma about it because, again, it's coming off the development of Cave Story, which is sort of historic and sort of a wonderful experience in of itself, and unfortunately it never reaches that level despite the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to. In the end, Kero Blaster is something I can recommend, but I just sort of wait on it at this point. Alright, this is Dragnix signing out. I hope you guys got an idea of what Kero Blaster has to offer. As always, I will leave my Steam review in the description below. Again, voting that up or down depending on whether or not you liked or disliked this review always helps the channel, or at least gives me feedback in terms of what I may need to change. And again, leave feedback. I'm always willing to take feedback in terms of trying something new or trying to change up the style a little bit in terms of what you guys need. If you have any questions about Kero Blaster, let me know. And again, like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz, and I will see you guys later. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you like this content and want to see more of it, you may want to hit that subscribe button on the left-hand side. If you like this video and want to see more of this content, take a look at this video on the left-hand side as well. And if you missed my last video, take a look at the right-hand side. Once again, thanks for watching, and keep on gaming.